everyone, it's Shell from Scrap Secrets and welcome back to my channel. In today's video, I'm going to show you how to stretch your supplies and create these 4 backgrounds from one set of layering stencils. I'm going to be using Distress Oxides, but you can use whatever inks you have. I'm going to also step up the backgrounds with some common supplies that you have in your craft room, but if you don't have them, I'm sure you can find something very similar. I have other ideas, so stay tuned and I'll walk you through them. So we're going to pick the layering stencils from Lawn Fawn. This is Spring Blossoms background stencils. It's a set of 3 layering stencils, and this is the first time I've used it. They were very easy to use. There are some etched pieces that are in each layer that are on the other layers, so it makes it super easy to line up. I started with the Greenery, but you can start with whatever stencil you want. It doesn't really matter. The only thing I would say is, depending on what color you're doing for your light and what color you're doing for your dark, you want to make sure that any of the blooms parts, you're using the lightest color on the most open pieces. Otherwise, the darker color is just going to overtake that lighter color. So let's start out with the greens layering stencil, and I'm using 2 colors of Distress Oxide for this. I'm using Mowed Lawn as well as Rustic Wilderness. Now I will switch it up later on. I don't do everything with the 2 colors, and I'm showing you how you can get different looks with just using a couple of different colors of oxides or whatever inks you're using. So while I went over everything with the Mowed Lawn the first time, I went in just within a couple of areas and added some of that Rustic Wilderness to it. And now we're going to get to the blooms layers, and I'm using the, this one is Shaded Lilac, and then I'm also going to use Spun Sugar. Now I put this in different areas and just kind of, some of them blended together, some of them didn't. It didn't really matter for this layer. I just wanted to put a little bit of layer of color down. Now, I did go in with a little bit of heavier hand in certain places, but that doesn't really matter. I probably should have gone in with a really light hand with all of this, but I am not a light-handed blender when it comes to putting ink onto the paper. I don't know about everybody else, but I tend to be heavy-handed, which is why the camera is shaking. So this is the Spun Sugar, and I'm just going to put it into whatever open areas are left. You can see that some of that blended with some of the purple, but that's why I picked these 2 colors, because they will blend together nicely to create a third color. You want to make sure that you check your color wheel, and you don't want to pick 2 colors that will create mud. So once that layer is done, I'm going to take this off and I'm going to lay down the third stencil. So I did the most open stencil for the blooms, and now I'm going in with the smaller portions of the blooms with the darker colors. And this is where I was saying to be careful of which colors. If I had gone in with the lighter colors here, it may have only darkened up a little bit of the darker areas. It wouldn't be as big of a contrast. So you can completely do that if you want to. And I didn't show you that here, but that's another idea of a way to, if you want to have not as big of a difference between your colors, that lighter color will just deepen that first color a little bit. So I would love to try that out one day. I didn't think about doing it until I did the voiceover. So we are doing some Kitsch Flamingo and Dusty Concord as the second layers of this stencil. So the Kitsch Flamingo is pretty much going to go wherever the Spun Sugar was, and the Dusty Concord will go over the Shaded Lilac. I tried to keep it into the areas as best as I could. These are smaller blending brushes than the one that I used for the Shaded Lilac, so it was a little bit easier to control where I had the ink. Now, if you're having that problem, you can use the finger daubers, which will give you a more controlled brush or like hand to go in with those things. There are also some smaller blending brushes that you could use to do more fine detail work. But for this case, this worked perfectly. So there's the card. The purples are probably a little bit too far apart, and it's definitely not my favorite, but I wanted to show you how you could use multiple colors on the layers so that you could get a varied look. Now this next one we're going to do, I'm going to be using the Mowed Lawn Distress Oxide to create the entire background, the entire greenery. We're going to just use mowed lawn on the back of it. I'm not going to add any Rustic Wilderness to it. So again, I'm just going through the whole stencil. I didn't leave all of this in. I did cut it out because it is kind of repetitive. And there you see me lining those stencils up to try to figure out which stencil I needed to go down before the other one. For some reason, I just kept having this like brain fart, I guess, and I couldn't figure out which stencil to do. So now we're just going in and doing straight up Spun Sugar. This whole layer is going to be Spun Sugar. I put it down with a relatively light hand, or what I thought was a relatively light hand. And again, you can see on the top left, there are some areas that are not as dark as the other areas. So I like that it gives it not an even, like not every floral is going to look the exact same color, because I've gone in with a heavier hand in certain places and a lighter hand in other places. So once I finished that one, and I did not have my magnets holding that down very well, I will go in and use the ruler in a little bit just to keep things into place. But I was really bad with this. They are super easy to line back up though, as you see there. It only took me a couple seconds. If I had moved the magnets, it probably would have taken me a lot less time. But that looks beautiful on its own. You could just leave it like that and you could be done. So that's another way. You could just use 2 of the layers. But now we're going to go back in with that third stencil, and then we are going to go back in with the darker color, which is Kitsch Flamingo, once I get this all lined up and the magnets put back down. Again, it was not hard to line up at all. And you can see here, I got a little bit smarter and I used the top and the side of that grid mat to perfectly line up where my where I wanted the stencil to be. And then I had the paper lined up at the 1-inch mark. So I kind of knew, and then butted up to the top. So I kind of knew exactly where it was going to go, where the paper would go and where the stencil should go. So there you go. Now I'm going in with that Kitsch Flamingo and just adding that detail layer. So you guys saw what it looked like without the detail layer, and it was beautiful. You can definitely do that without the detail layer, but I really think the detail layer makes all the difference. Look at that. And these 2 colors were pretty close together, and I think it looks better with the ones that are closer together than with the ones that I did with the purples. I think they were a little bit too far off. So now we're going to go in and do our third background, and we're going to use Rustic Wilderness for all the florals. So we've done 2 colors for the florals, and then each of those 2 colors separately in the for one background. So I'm putting that Rustic Wilderness on. Once that was done, I'm going to show you it kind of double stenciled right there in the bottom right hand corner, but it doesn't bother me. It actually kind of has a cool effect. What you could do is stencil it with a heavier hand and then move it slightly off to the side, and then you'll have a little shadow there. So if you want to do something like that. So because those purples were so far off in color, I thought, let's try this technique. So I went with a lighter-ish hand with the shaded lilac and went over the second stencil, which is the more open one. Went over all of that with just shaded lilac. And again, I tried to go a little less heavy-handed with this one, because for this technique, you're going to want to do your first layer pretty light, because you're going to go over with the next set of stencils with that same exact color. And because the color is layered on top of that color, it's going to create a darker shade of the color. Just like when you stamp with one color of ink and then stamp it again, it creates a darker image. That would be beautiful with itself, like right there, just that second layer. I really do like that, and I think I will do a background of just that, just the greenery and that open stencil. And I'd like to see what it looks like with just this stencil, so I'm going to have to try that too. But I ran out of time. So now I am going to go in with that shaded lilac again, like I said. So we're using 1 color of purple Distress Oxide to create these florals, and it's going to look like we use two different shades. But because we are layering it on top of the other one and pressing a little bit harder, being a little bit heavy-handed on this one, it creates a darker shade, and you would never know that you used one color of Distress Oxide. And again, you can do this with any type of ink that you want. So once I finished that, I think this was probably this and the next one are my favorite backgrounds. And you can see that I kind of didn't line it up perfectly, and it slipped. And again, I should have taped it down or used some pixie spray or something like that, but I didn't. I was in a hurry to kind of get these done, but I think that one is beautiful. I love that background. So I'm going to clean everything off and then put that to the side. And now we're going to do the one that is the most brightly colored background. So I switched it up and I picked up some Twisted Citron Distress Oxide because if you notice, my Distress Oxide have new labels on them. If you follow me on Instagram, you saw what I spent my entire weekend doing, and I'm sure I'll show it to you in another video. But I relabeled all of them, and I found the Twisted Citron. I loved it when I redid it. So I was like, let me use it on this like springy card. I wanted to do spring colors, so I completely switched it up. So we used Twisted Citron for the greenery. We're going to be using Squeezed Lemonade for the more open layer of the stencil. So we're changing it up from the pinks and purples to yellows and oranges, which I just think this color combination is beautiful. So this is the Squeezed Lemonade going on the second layer, which is the more open one. And, we did two colors in the same color family, and now we're doing ones that are not, a yellow and an orange. And it just, like I said, I think this one and the purple one are my absolute favorites of the last two. I just think that looks beautiful without adding anything, but once you add this dry marigold on top of it, so beautiful. So this is a newer oxide to me. I got this in, I think, one of my last hauls. I got the dried marigold. And again, I did not really use it until I started labeling my Distress Oxides this weekend, and I'm like, God, this color is so beautiful. Why have I've had the ink for a while. I think I've had the ink for a while. I've had one of them and I never use it, and it's absolutely beautiful. It's like a peachy yellow, or I'm sorry, peachy orange, and it goes wonderfully with this yellow. So, okay, so I'll stop raving about dried marigold, but this is not a color combination that I would normally use, but I just felt like this stencil set screamed for these bright, bold, beautiful spring colors. Look at how gorgeous that is. That is just, I just love this one. So now that you've created the 4 backgrounds, you can completely leave them here. So I'm going to show you all 4 of them. That's the last one that we just did. There's the one with 1 color of Distress Oxide for the flowers. Here's the one of 2 colors from the same family of Distress Oxide for the flowers. The other one, we used 4 colors of Distress Oxide and kind of mixed it up. So I decided I'm going to step up these backgrounds. So I'm taking the all purple one, the one that we used the 1 color of Distress Oxide on, and I'm taking my white gel pen and just adding some details. Highlights to the flowers, dots to the center of the florals that have the dots on them. I added some white dots, added some crosses to those cross symbol things, whatever they are, and I just added it to there. So you saw how it looked before, and I'm going to show you an up-close picture after I add some of these. I'm just showing you how I did this, but it steps it up, and it just gives it that little bit of something to make it look like you took it to the next level. There's nothing wrong with the background as it was, but I think it looks absolutely gorgeous and finished with the white gel pen. So adding white gel pen to something is another way to step up your background. Like, look at how beautiful that looks. I think that just finishes it. So I'm just comparing it to the purple one to show you kind of what it looked like before, because that was very similar to now. So the next trick is to use some Lacquer Pen. You can use Nouveau drops. You can use, what the heck is it called? Oh, oh my gosh, the clear glossy accents. I couldn't think of it. Sorry guys. You could use glossy accents to this, and I just added it to those smaller flowers, not all over the place. And then I flicked the bottom because there was a point at the top, and if you flick the bottom, it rounds out those domes, and they just looked so beautiful. Again, it wasn't much, but it added something to it. You could also add rhinestones to there, pearls, sequins, anything like that. So on the next one, we are going to add some Spectrum Noir Sparkle Pen. Now this does get the color moving a little bit because it's a little wet, so in some of the places it blended it together. So you could use this to blend out the harshness of the lines from the stencil and kind of get a nice smooth blend. If you do this on watercolor paper, you could also take a wet brush and smooth out those lines a little bit with just a teeny tiny bit of water and make it look more realistic and not have such harsh lines. But just adding that little bit of sparkle to this, again, love it. And you could combine all of these techniques together. I didn't do anything with the last one because I thought with all the colors it kind of was just stepped up in itself. So there are the 4 backgrounds that I've created, and I hope I've given you a bunch of ideas on things to do with these backgrounds. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you have questions or comments, please leave them below, and I will see you again real soon for another video. Bye!